Namaste. Welcome back. Let's begin with heart rate variability, breathing. So find yourself in a comfortable seat. Spine is straight. Sit bones, legs, feet are grounded. Heart is proud, while the shoulders are relaxed. Before you close the eyes, just take a moment to scan the room with a soft gaze and allow your eyes to settle on one object. Soften the gaze even more as you look at this object. Looking as if it's the first time. Notice this object in the room. And now become aware of the space around this object. As you start seeping into peripheral vision, into Buddha eyes, taking in the scenery now from the space surrounding the object where the eyes are fixed. Now, while paying attention to the peripheral vision, notice any sounds that you hear in the soundscape around you. Sounds from far away, and sounds that are a little bit closer. Become aware of any taste sensations in the mouth. And now the touch of the clothing, the hair, the chair on your skin. The touch of the breath as it moves over the top lip. And finally, the smell in the air as you breathe in. And now go ahead and close the eyes and notice the gateway that took your attention inward. Now watch the breath from the inside. Observe the breath and notice which sense brought you inside. Which sense is focused on the breath now? Pay keen attention to that sense. And observe the breath. Observe the natural breath. Notice the medium of observation and become aware of that. And now start to slowly extend the exhalation for a couple of extra counts beyond the length of the inhalation. As you slow down the exhalation, watch the breath smoothly transition back into the inhalation. And from the inhalation, watch the breath smoothly circle and transition into the exhalation with no pausing, no jerking. Slow, steady breath cycles. Slow down the exhalation and continue with smooth, cyclical breath. Continue paying attention to the power of observation. As you listen to my voice, what is observing internally? Just notice. Now let go of any counting of the breath, any effort. Settle into the witness state, an effortless state of being. become aware that you are aware of this state. All five senses focused inside. And we'll open with the sound of Om. And bring your hands to heart center. Nice deep breath in to begin. Namaste. All right. So this lesson is about the history and lineage of Yoga Nidra. And so we will begin where this study began, looking at the different levels of consciousness, and then where the practice, so we'll look first where the theory comes from, and then where the practice began, and then how that practice was expanded and evolved into the practice that we have today. So the first place where we begin looking at where the sages began looking at the states of consciousness was in the Upanishads. Now remember that the Vedas are the original texts which speak about, Brahman and Atman. Of course, the Vedas also include some rituals and songs, information about various aspects of Indian spirituality. But this idea of consciousness began to be explored more deeply in the Upanishads. And the Upanishads are considered a completion of the Vedic texts. Now, the word Upanishad means to sit close by. And this collection of texts called the Upanishads is essentially a conversation between student and master, and the student asking the master, sitting close by the master, and asking about the nature of reality. And so when we take this concept of Brahman and Atman and why there is a separation, why we experience this illusion, this movement away from our true nature, then we have to understand the different levels of consciousness. And one of the Upanishads in particular, the Mandukya Upanishad, explores this Om. And if you look at the sounds of Om, you have the A, the U, and the of course. And so each of these represents a different state of consciousness. We know from modern psychology about the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious. And then there's this additional state, the silence after the Om, this turiya, or this supraconscious state. And it's in this silence, essentially, where these three states of consciousness sort of merge together. and where the Atman realizes itself as the Brahman, as always a part of that cosmic consciousness. And so, of course, conscious state is, the waking state, the active mind. Of course, the subconscious would be like the dream state, and the unconscious would be the deep sleep state. And conscious state, if we begin to look at it, occupies such a small portion of our time, even in the day. And so the idea then is, if we can become conscious within the subconscious and within the unconscious, then we have access to this larger consciousness, because it is already there. It's always awakened. There's also a teaching from the Vedas that explores the different witnesses of the different states of consciousness. So each state has its own witness, and that's very interesting, because if you think about the subconscious, the dream state, then there has to be a witness, or else there wouldn't be a memory of the dream, right? And so even in the unconscious, the deep sleep state, there's something there that is still conscious, because otherwise, when a fly lands on our leg, we wouldn't just automatically brush it off, or when the body begins to get overheated, it naturally just pulls off the blanket. But this is all done in our unconscious state. And so this larger consciousness is always awakened. The other point to make about the unconscious state is that, again, there's a memory of sleep, right? There is a memory that you were unconscious for a certain period of time. You know that 6 hours or 7 hours have passed by. So the idea then is to come into direct knowledge of this larger consciousness. And so that is, really the goal of Yoga Nidra, is to become conscious of, during the unconscious and the subconscious states. And so we'll explore how we sort of slow down the brain, but hold on to the sense of hearing in order to do that, in order to stay conscious within each of these states that we travel through every single night. So this is an interesting image. You can find this on swamij.com, a really helpful website to understand the philosophy of yoga. But here you can see how one traverses these states from waking through dreaming to the deep sleep, and eventually into the supra-conscious state. So there, on the left-hand side, you can see the arrows, and of course this is representing our senses that bring us into an externally focused reality. And it is the body that draws this sense information in, of course, right? And the conscious mind sort of makes sense of the information that the body is bringing in. And of course, we know from yoga that the link between our body and our mind is the breath, because the breath is a physiological process that is happening unconsciously. It's happening no matter what. So in our deep sleep, in our unconscious state, we are still breathing. But it's also a physiological state that we can harness and control with the mind. And so by beginning to control the breath, which otherwise would be an unconscious physiological process, we begin to train our mind to become conscious of the unconscious. So the breath is a very important link here. So then you see that all of this represents the waking state or the conscious state. And then we have this unconscious mind. So these next two steps here. So we have the active dreaming state, which we could call the subconscious mind. And notice how there's a split sort of between that conscious mind, because even when we are awake and aware, our conscious mind is paying attention to very specific things, while our subconscious mind is taking in and storing everything else. So while we may not be consciously aware, for example, that there's 6 windows in this room, our subconscious mind knows, and our subconscious mind is storing that information for us. And so that's why this dreaming state or the subconscious state is sort of perforating through the conscious mind, because the subconscious state is constantly, as I mentioned, taking in and storing information. Okay, so then we have this dreaming state, right? And now we're showing sort of part of the unconscious mind, that the active part of the unconscious. So when you're in your dream cycle of sleep, then that subconscious mind is active, and there's some great practices like lucid dreaming, where you can begin to be aware of your dreams. And this is practicing becoming conscious within the subconscious mind. And so we have then the dream state, and then of course the deep sleep state, representing the unconscious mind. And we'll see later how this process parallels the brain states. So another thing to point out here within the dreaming and the deep sleep is that one can have a sort of transcendental experience during sleep that brings the person into direct knowledge with the superconscious state, with the cosmic consciousness, and these dreams, these experiences that one can have during sleep, if they're remembered the next morning, and one focuses on it, just after waking, takes the time to reflect, what was that dream that I had, and then one can use that supernatural experience had during sleep as a dharana, a concentration point, a point of focus that will lead them into the higher states of dhyana and samadhi. Okay, so then you have this turiya state. Remember, that's the superconscious, and of course the question mark there with the silence of the Om. And so this is the state that the sages, that the ancients try to define for us, try to paint the image for us through these elaborate stories and definitions, but words will never come close to this experience. Okay, so this is sort of a diagram of what we're doing. Well, we do this every day, right? So in every day we go from the waking conscious mind to the dream state, to the deep sleep, and maybe to the turiya state, and then back through the dream state and the waking state. Here's another look at that. Okay, so each of these diagrams then would represent a different person, right, or a different body. And so, how can we understand ourselves as, the drop in the ocean? Well, everyone is going through these different states of mind to the unknown every single night. And so, this image is showing you then the direct knowledge, right? So, each of those outside circles are representing a different body and their journey through these states and into direct knowledge with Source. So that's a little bit about the theory, and now we'll look at the practice of Yoga Nidra. Where did this come from? So the practice really began with Tantra, okay? And remember that Tantra uses our experiences, whatever we're experiencing in the world, is an extension of that source consciousness. And that means that we can then use our experiences as a tool for knowing that, for tapping into that creative source. Okay, and you may remember learning, before that Tantra is using the physical body, so the material aspects of the being, those outer layers of the koshas, to access the infinite. Okay, so before Tantra, the path of yoga was always renunciation from the mundane world. But when Tantra was introduced, it opened up the path of yoga for the householder. It made yoga possible for the everyday person who has a family and who has a partner and children. And many of the great masters throughout history were householders, and that includes my teacher's master. They were instructed by their masters to actually go back into the householder life because it was an essential part of their awakening process. And so Tantra harnesses those experiences, those real world experiences, to bring the practitioner from this externally focused world into the internal and eventually into that source consciousness. Here's a quote from Swami Satyananda. Yoga Nidra is regarded as a tantric practice because in Tantra, the evolution of the mind should be a spontaneous matter. You do not have to fight with your nature, habits, and limitations, because by doing so, you're creating animosity within yourself. And remember, in yoga, we're practicing ahimsa, non-harm. And so if you're fighting with your nature and you're fighting with the natural experiences that you have, then you're creating, as he says, this animosity within yourself and bringing you even farther from your goal, because whatever we resist persists, right? Wherever there's friction, if we're thinking of Indian philosophy, there's samskara, right? So anytime that we're pushing against something, we are acting in a way that we want a specific goal. We have a specific end goal in mind. Whereas if we're flowing with the potency of life, then we can use whatever experience that life gives us to better understand ourselves. And that's the essence of Tantra. Okay, here's a little background of the mythology, which is nice to hear about. So here what you're seeing is an expression of Vishnu in Nidra, so in a resting sleep state, lying on this ocean of milk. And so this is the Hindu creation story, right? So remember, Vishnu is the maintainer, okay? So he is the preserver of the Hindu Trinity. So there he is, the preserver. And from his belly button springs this lotus flower. And on this lotus flower is Brahma, the creator of the Trinity. So this means that in Yoga Nidra, the unconscious manifests, and it's from the unconscious that our creative power, our ability to manifest and create things in this world springs. So it's coming from that unconscious state. My teacher's master would say that when we go to sleep every night and we go through those states of into the subconscious and the unconscious, um, then and also when we travel these states in Yoga Nidra, um, and especially in Yoga Nidra when there's that lucid experience of coming into the unconscious state with consciousness and coming into that power of creation. He says, every time we go into that unconscious, we're sort of peeking into the bedchambers of Brahman. And I love this analogy because when we fully relax into that state, we become our true selves, and we sort of merge into that, what I like to call the cosmic soup of amazingness. So that's a little bit about the mythology. Let's go on and look more at where this practice comes from. So we talked about Tantra, and it's in this Nyasa yoga that we see the practice of the rotation of consciousness. So the word nyasa, this is a tantric practice. It means to place or to put in, and it's an internal calibration of your vibration to prepare yourself for union with source consciousness. So traditionally, these Nyasa yogis, before they would enter the temple, or do their puja ceremony of dedication, they would place or put mantra into each body part. And so, we see this in Yoga Nidra as the rotation of consciousness. Now, Swami Satyananda, who we'll look at in a moment, when he took this practice of Nyasa yoga and applied it to the modern day practitioner, he wanted to remove any kind of sort of religious association, and so he removed the mantra. But it's a really nice practice, and I like to do this as well, is when I'm listening to Yoga Nidra or if I'm guiding myself, when for example, right hand thumb is stated, I repeat it in my mind and visualize filling the thumb with Om. So chanting that vibration of Om into each body part. And, as we know, Om is a healing vibration, just like all of the syllables in the Sanskrit alphabet. And so by doing that, you're sort of harnessing that sound healing capability within yourself as well, and you're setting this intention of purification within the body. So while the rotation of consciousness, what it's used for, works just fine by just repeating each body part, you can, if you so choose, you can make it a little bit more sacred, a little bit more meaningful for you. And if the word Om doesn't resonate, it could be another word like God or Jesus, or some word that that is holy and reminds you of that divine, permeating, omniscient consciousness. So here is the man, Swami Satyananda Saraswati. And so He is really who brought the Yoga Nidra back into the modern day, into a practice. And the way he sort of discovered it was he was working as a security guard at a boys' ashram. And when he would fall asleep, the boys would chant mantras. And one day when he woke up and heard the mantras, he realized that he knew them, but he had never studied them. And so he asked his guru, Swami Shivananda, how do I know these mantras? And his teacher said, well, every time you doze off, there's only a tiny portion of you that actually goes to sleep, and the rest is awake and aware. And so, how do we make contact with that? How do we become it? Was Swami Satyananda Sarasvati's question, right? How do we make contact with that part of us that stays awake and aware during sleep? And he went back to these ancient texts to find the tantric teachings of Nyasa Yoga, and he began to explore and figure out how we can consciously enter that larger portion of our awareness. So it was an exploration of the koshas, or the energetic sheaths, that sort of led to the unbounded nature. So a knowing that, it's from the finite form to the infinite unbounded essence. And so the koshas take us on a journey, from that finite, that material, that impermanent, constantly changing, never staying the same, to the infinite. And it's a journey from the gross to subtler, 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 all the way into that, right? And so, he reviewed and systematized this Nyasa yoga of exploring the body parts, and did a lot of research and practice in order to explore these koshas and harmonize each and every one to bring the practitioner sequentially deeper and deeper, and eventually into that state of unbounded awareness. So here is my teacher of Yoga Nidra. Her name is Tanis Fishman, and she studied under Swami Satyananda Sarasvati. And here is her amazing school of Yoga Nidra, the School of Sankalpa. And there's the website there. I highly recommend that you look her up. She is on Insight Timer, which I recommend over YouTube, because sometimes YouTube has advertisements that sort of pop up in the middle. So look her up on Insight Timer. It's a really great app anyways to download. And you can listen to her incredibly profound Yoga Nidra practices. And in fact, Yoga Nidra was not a practice that really resonated with me until I started listening to her practices. And with the practices that you receive in this course, the beginning ones are directly from Swami Satyananda Sarasvati's book, and then following those are inspiration from Tanis Fishman. Okay, so finally, let's take a look at these other lineages of Yoga Nidra. So here you see the Himalayan Institute, and this is Swami Rama's contribution. So the Himalayan Institute is an institute created by Swami Rama and now run by his students. And of course, Swami Rama is actually my personal lineage for my philosophy teacher. Of course, his master's master was Swami Rama. But the Yoga Nidra that's practiced is a little bit different, only in that in the Himalayan Institute, the Yoga Nidra state is seen as being deep in theta and delta brain waves rather than alpha. And again, we'll go through these brain waves in a few moments, but for now, suffice it to say that theta and delta are even slower brainwave states than alpha. Okay, Swami Rama did experiments in delta states, staying conscious to show the scientific community what was possible as he slowed down his heart rate and eventually made it stop for a period of time. Okay, so what the Himalayan Institute Lineage of Yoga is focused on bringing the practitioner slowly into a state of presence with the brain in the delta brainwave state, which is the slowest brainwave state. Now, this lineage, is a very slow apprentice style sort of teaching. Okay, now in slight contrast, the Bihar School of Yoga, which is what Swami Satyananda Sarasvati has founded, the Bihar School of Yoga lengthens the alpha state to prepare the practitioner for meditation. And so the focus in the Bihar School of Yoga is learning how to stay awake and focused in order to enter dharana and dhyana. So the differences are very slight between the Himalayan and the Bihar School of Yoga, in that the focus is to just bring the practitioner into different brain wave states. Okay, we'll talk more about that later. There's another school, Rod Stryker, called Enlightened Sleep, and this is a combination of the Himalayan Institute and Satyananda. And the idea here is, again, it's no matter which one we're looking at. Oh, and Richard Miller, of course, with iRest, which you can look those up as well. But no matter which lineage we're looking at, this is always the pratyahara technique. It's the fifth of the 8 limbs of yoga. So it is always a precursor for meditation, precursor for direct knowledge of the deeper recesses of our consciousness. It's part of the Raja Yoga system, and it's also a standalone practice in and of itself. Okay, in the next class, we'll talk about the benefits of the Yoga Nidra practice. So let's close today with 1 Om. Sit up straight. Close the eyes. Hands to the heart. Take a deep breath in. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Namaste, Namaste.